What's up, everybody? Luke Kohen here. Today we're going to talk about the elephant in the room, one of many. But this one's touchy and nuanced because it taps into the essence of our shared humanity in a journey that I believe every soul on the planet is navigating to a degree. And this is the shadow of codependency. And going into the subject, it's a gateway into so many other aspects, from relationship to the power systems on our planet to the healing journey that we're going through as a humanity in order to arrive at more higher functioning systems, right? And so let's talk about codependency. Let's just dive right in. You know, we are taught codependency very strongly in our culture, and it's part of the setup. It's part of the setup of being in this body on the earth. We're born through a feminine body into the world, and we are completely and utterly dependent on our parents, on at least our mothers, in order to survive, in order to live. And so that those early formative stages of development set up a type of dependency: food, connection, touch, love, shelter, all these things where we are literally incapable of taking care of ourselves as infants. And so this sets up an imprint and depending on the relationship that you've had with your parents and those types of the different styles of wounding that we can go through as individuals in our life, in those stages of development, from inside the womb to infant to small child to then the cognitive mind turns on at around 4 or 5. You know, those things are stored inside of our nervous system. And so a lot of codependency that plays out in the world and in relationships comes from those formative years. And so let's look at this, you know, in culture, the beliefs and the stories and the myths that actually arise from codependency as a normalized phenomena. Because we lost the rites of passage of tribal cultures and other things where we would individuate from mother as men, or women would be initiated into a sisterhood and sort of do the red tent and bleed on the earth and have these types of ceremonies and rituals we've lost. And so because that rite of passage never happened, or isn't necessarily a ingrained part of our contemporary culture, the opportunity to individuate and heal and move out of codependency into individuation hasn't happened for a majority of beings on this planet. And so, you know, for example, for men, when it's time to leave the nest, they go up on the mountain, they have these, you know, days of survival in the forest, and they go in a boy and they come out a man, right? So these kinds of things that help us leave the dependency, right? Instead, we get the opposite. We get reinforced in our codependency in our cultures. We have pop songs, you're the only one, and you know, you're my everything, and without you I'll die. Like these are the feelings of an infant. These are the feelings of an infantile consciousness that's relying on mommy as the source, but in an adult person, right? And so these kinds of dynamics, they infiltrate our relationships, they infiltrate how we do our businesses, and informs culture on our planet as a whole. And so the journey out of codependency now is such a necessary stage of life if we're going to evolve into higher systems. For example, a lot of the hierarchical systems and a lot of the things that manage codependency or put the people into the dominant position of ideal parent or authority, they get to prey on that wound in others. And so in our current systems, we don't have holacracy, we don't have synarchy, which is the way of circle, which was some more of the matriarchal or tribal ways as well, where people made decisions in types of councils and met the substance of what was happening in the village in a way that it could be unpacked in real time, and projections and all these other things got to be seen and witnessed and met without a veil of control and all these other things. So because we've lost those technologies, even though they're available to us, and I call them technologies because they're technologies of the soul, we haven't necessarily evolved as a collective consciousness into systems that serve all of life. A lot of our systems are dependent on exploitation, manipulation, dominance, these kinds of things. And so many beings unconsciously try to resolve their codependency in these other ways. They become dominant. They do these other things as a way to sequester and to compensate for the pain of codependency. And when we talk about codependency, we're talking about the source point of addiction, of mental health, of all these things, of when if we didn't have consistent nurturing, or we had violation, or we had abandonment, or we had abuse, or we had any one of these different setups or scenarios that imprinted us. And this is what my friend Dan Regan calls our slice of the sacred wound. We each have our version of that. And it's up to the individual to choose a pathway out of codependency and into individuation and into sovereignty. And only from that place of individuation and sovereignty can we create these new systems, which look like interdependency. It's not you get so isolated that you lose connection with other human beings. That's not, that you might need to go through that for a stage of the journey, but when I talk about codependency, it's not that we need an extreme opposite of it. It's that there's an integrated version of interconnectedness where the adult reality of the human being, of the nervous system, can be in connection with other and not play out those styles of wounds. And so when we talk about this thing, it's like when I say the elephant in the room, it's because there's shame around it. It's the shadow of humanity. It's something that exists in so many beings and yet isn't really talked about enough, isn't really acknowledged. And many beings will go at lengths to defend their codependency as opposed to committing to the path of healing it, because it's very uncomfortable to address the wounds that are underneath it, to be with some of those bigger feelings that are associated with codependency, and because it's so rooted in our survival consciousness that it's very confronting to look at. But again, if we want to evolve as a collective consciousness, we have to look at these imprints and how they play out and play into our entire systems and culture. So I'm under the belief that there's a new culture emerging underneath the chaos of these old dominant systems. And so if you're someone that sees what's going on the planet right now and you're witnessing all this chaos and all these different sort of systems of manipulation and bringing people into these sort of collective thoughts, it's poking that pain of separation in the individuation that hasn't happened. So a lot of souls are being asked to individuate now without necessarily the context or the tools to individuate out of sort of a collective codependency on our systems, codependency on government, codependency with some of the old versions of currency and exchange. So when we start to value ourselves differently, when we start to relate to ourselves differently, we can go on that journey of individuation, of healing codependency. And it's not necessarily glamorous, but it's worthwhile. And in sovereignty and in interdependency, we can move into that synarchy, that holacracy, that way of governance that includes the voice, the actual voice of the people, right, of each other. And it's an evolved return to village. It's returning to some of the ancient aspects without having to regress. Like, it's not about, we're not all going to move into a yurt overnight or live just off the land. Like, technology has its place. These ancient technology has its place, and we can create something that's innovative and evolutionary. All right. So when I say leaving codependency, it doesn't mean that you need to go through a particular version of a rite of passage. Each soul has to find their way out and heal those wounds in the way that works for their unique system, their unique karma, their unique energy system. And so it's going to look different for everybody, but the new results that come from doing that work informs an alternative to what we have now, which is massive dependency, substance abuse, Stockholm syndrome collectively, the ability for really unfulfilling relationships that where people feel possessed or trapped, or they're playing out the avoidant and different attachment styles, which I've experienced in my life. I'm very much in the continuous journey of individuating and staying in connection. This is interdependency, right? So I'm speaking from someone that's been working on this for 17 years and have had my journey with it, and it's been messy at times, and not idealistic and not this glamorous spiritual path. There's been messiness to it, but this is one of the most fundamental issues that we need to speak about, as a humanity, if we're going to resolve the wound that sets up these actual systems of control that actually put us in a place where people feel that they have no other choice but to hand over their power. So those codependency wounds is where the susceptibility to all these things. This is where we get into the dynamics of empath, narcissist. This is where we get into any of the unresolved stuff from childhood based on that codependent wound. So we are collectively on the journey of individuating from some of our current systems that thrive off of feeding on those types of wounds and those kinds of conditions. This is the pathway into true mental health and out of any kind of substance addiction. This is the path of entering a higher level of divine union with the beloved. So the gateway of this shadow is the pathway into an evolution in consciousness on the planet. And it's something that you're gonna see being talked about more. Just like, the Me Too and all these other movements that have emerged out of like humanity wanting to resolve something that has just been pushed under the rug. So right now, the shadow of codependency is surfacing, and because of the collective shame around it, because of all the compensation mechanisms and coping mechanisms and identities that go around sheltering and justifying codependency, it's one of the most fundamentally confronting things of our evolution in consciousness as a humanity. And we're going to see those that default into that handing over of power, of that survival mechanism of deferring to an external parent to take care of self, as opposed to the rite of passage that life is offering humanity right now to individuate and to heal the deep wounding from those situations in order to create a new system, a system that actually works for life, that is in harmony with nature, that is in harmony with the sovereignty and the free will and choice of another soul to choose what works for them as long as it causes no harm. So, just some seeds around what the new culture has and some of the nuances of it. What is the journey of healing codependency? So this is, obviously there's like a book worth of material around codependency, and I am writing around this and we'll be sharing more around this, but I wanted to offer just this first little drop in the ocean of the seed access point of, wow, codependency is actually one of the most systemic core wounds of humanity. We each have our slice of it. It's each our own self-responsibility to heal that or not, or choose a pathway out of that into sovereignty or not, and to see it in our current systems, to see how it shows up in pop culture, in movies with the romantic fantasies, and that this ideal situation looks like this, when we know and we've seen most of the time it doesn't work. Those systems of relationship are actually toxic and dysfunctional, and getting into the admittance and getting into the humility and the honoring of how those things actually function, right, and how they feel in relationship, they don't necessarily work. So just deep love to everyone out there for wherever you're at in your journey of healing codependency, or just if you've come to this video, you've even gotten this far to be exploring this topic and what it means for your own life, for the life of your community, of this collective movement, and also what's taking place on the planet. So courage to those souls that are entering into that work at a higher level in these days, to choose a path of sovereignty, to choose a path of individuation, of healing the sacred wound, and coming back into connection with those that will support you in your individuation and healing journey, but without having the extreme of the isolation, having the extreme of these things, which is happening organically for many, many beings out there. Thanks for tuning in. I'm going to dive in more around this. Stay tuned for other videos. I'm going to stay on these platforms for as long as it makes sense to, but get in touch. DMs are open. Share, like, comment. Let's walk each other home, as Ram Dass says, as we continue the good work forward of healing our hearts, and therefore the heart of humanity, of individuating so we can be sovereign, independent adult souls, making informed choices for ourselves and the lives of the people that we're choosing to be in connection with, in service to something much greater than ourselves. Thanks so much. Stay tuned.